Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another Wednesday webinar with us at Strove. Hopefully, you're all feeling a little bit warmer with the turn in weather down south here. It's got a little bit colder up north, but um, today's session might ring true for how we're navigating the cold snap at the moment. So welcome to today's session with Angie Bennett, who I'm very happy to introduce, who's been part of the Strove family for quite a while. She was integral a little while back and has come back along this way to um, cover sort of a very, I think, poignant area for us and something that's quite worthwhile. We are rethinking relationships with alcohol today, and Angie is one of our practitioners who's available for one-on-one consults in a talk feature in the app. You can book sessions with her, and one area that she focuses on and is quite passionate about is this relationship with alcohol. And I've always kind of enjoyed the way Angie's approached this with the conversations that we've had, and it's not necessarily about demonizing alcohol in any way, but the relationships that we have with it. And I think a lot of that that you're going to cover today with us, Angie, will be about that, and the reasons and habits that we form, and maybe looking into the why behind of all these, and how they can still be part of a healthy relationship and a healthy approach to lifestyle. But knowing its place, I think, is quite important, and empowering us to maybe think about that a little bit ourselves is maybe what I want to get out of today's session, and hopefully everyone's got something that they'd like to get out as well. So I'll hand over to Angie to run through this. If you guys have any questions along the way, please feel free to pop it into the chat. We'll swing back to it all towards the end and have a bit of a conversation about anything that does pop up. So feel free to post it as you think of it, and you can stick it in there. And we'll chat a little bit later. Angie, I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you very much for joining us today. Looking forward to the session.
Amazing. Thanks, Adrian. And welcome, everyone. And thank you very much for being here. So today we're going to do something that most of us probably don't often do, which is to stop and think properly about our relationship with alcohol. And one caveat, as Adrian mentioned, this is not about abstinence. It's not about labels. It's just an opportunity to rethink how we relate to alcohol. So I want to start with a question. If you think about your last drink, so not your best drink, not your worst drink, just the most recent one, which of these best describes it? So, was it around genuine celebration or winding down after the day? Or was it perhaps just there? Or maybe you're just not sure at all. And if you're like most people that I do this with, very few of us end up picking number one. Most drinks are not celebrations. They're managing stress, managing an evening, managing a feeling that we haven't quite looked at. And the other thing that I've learned is that it's difficult to answer that question in the moment of the drink. And that's not because we lack self-awareness, but it's rather that the honest answer to that question doesn't actually live in your conscious mind. It lives in your nervous system. It lives in your body, in your environment, in patterns that formed long before you've ever even noticed them. And that realization really changes things, because if the driver of the choice to have a drink is not a conscious one in the sense that we might have perceived it to be conscious, then willpower, which is a very conscious tool, was never really going to be the answer. And that's why every attempt where we try and sort of power through and use willpower to moderate or regulate or change our relationships with alcohol, and the harder we try, it often ends up failing. So if willpower is not the answer to taking the power back with our relationship with alcohol, then what is it? Well, luckily, that's what we're going to be discussing in the next little while. And it comes down to one central idea. Alcohol has power over you only for as long as the pattern stays invisible. This is really the whole thing. As long as that loop is running in the dark, you're kind of at the mercy of it. You're negotiating with something that you can't really see, using a tool, willpower, that wasn't designed for that job. And then when it fails, which it often does, that willpower, I'm only going to have one tonight, or I'm only going to drink on the weekends, you kind of blame yourself. But then that deepens the loop of, oh, well, I've had two, I might as well have a three. But once you start to see that pattern and name it and change the conditions around it, then something starts to shift. And alcohol stops being kind of this powerful force that you're kind of at the mercy of. Like, oh, I'm at an event, I'm just going to have a drink, or oh, it's Christmas, I have to. So once you're no longer at the mercy of it, it becomes something you can choose in moments that genuinely call for it, and skip it in moments that don't, not through discipline, but rather through visibility. And there are four things that kind of really bring that together. So the firstly is awareness. So it's kind of what I've been alluding to. Awareness allows you to see that pattern. Regulation gives your nervous system what it's reaching for, because so often we're actually reaching for kind of something to regulate our nervous system to help us alter a state. And then habit architecture redesigns the conditions that trigger that alcohol loop of kind of needing a drink, reaching for a drink. And then the identity work makes the whole thing much more durable, much more likely to succeed, so that you're not white knuckling, because white knuckling is the worst thing you can do. It's that kind of concept in alcoholism of like a dry drunk. White knuckling through things is not an enjoyable state to be. And we want to really work towards a healthy and happy relationship with alcohol, not something that you're fighting. So we want to take the power back so you're not fighting it anymore. And those are the four pillars that we're going to work through today. So, let us start with awareness, because I think everything else depends on it. Because if you can't see the pattern, nothing you do about it is going to really have much impact. You're kind of just floundering around in the dark. And, discipline aimed at an invisible target leads to self-blame, which is a space that we don't want to be in. So let's work on making this pattern more visible. So we're going to sort of dive a little here into kind of really unpacking that pattern. Every habit, alcohol included, runs on a four-stage loop. So this is sort of basic habit architecture stuff. You've got your cue, your craving, your routine, and your reward. So whether it's alcohol or food or whatever it is, but it's this kind of, I guess that looks a bit more tidy on a slide. So let me put a real evening around it. Stage one, the cue. So this could be like you walk into your kitchen at 6:30 on a Tuesday. And then that in itself kind of becomes the cue, the time of day, the room, maybe the sight of the bottle on the counter. It doesn't have to be a huge dramatic thing. It's just that your brain has bound that behavior to those signals through hundreds of repetitions, over many years. And just being there is enough to load that sequence. And then stage two is the craving. So that's where you start to feel it in the body. It's not really a thought, it's more like a sensation. So a slight leaning towards it. Sort of most people, often we don't notice this stage much at all, but it's that sensation in the body is really important to create awareness around it, because it's at this stage where choice is still possible. And then stage three, the routine. You pour the drink. So this is the part that we always see and we're most aware of, obviously. And this is kind of what we talk about when we say the habit. But at this stage, the decision has already been made. The cue and the craving are kind of where we have the power still. By the time we're getting to the routine and we're pouring the drink, the decision's done. And then stage four, the reward. So obviously there's a reward. Your nervous system genuinely does shift. You're getting that state shift. And then the activation drops, the edge softens. And so that is teaching our brain very effectively to run that same loop tomorrow. But the crucial thing that I'm kind of really want to highlight here is that for most people, only stage 3 is visible, the pull. Everything else before that, the cue and the craving, that all is running on autopilot. And that's why willpower feels like fighting an invisible opponent, because we're not creating that awareness around the cue and the craving. And you're kind of only meeting the loop at stage 3. So by that time, your momentum is already carrying you. One thing I really want to highlight before we start looking at the tools we can use for these patterns is I want to name the approach that makes all of this work. Because you can look at this loop in these different stages with very different sets of eyes. And only one of them is going to allow you to really collect useful information. And the first is to be very critical. That internal voicing, I shouldn't have had that drink. Why did I have another one? Like, oh, why can't I have less? Any of those kind of really critical thinking. It feels like it's taking responsibility, which is often why we kind of default to it. But actually, what it's doing is it's triggering shame. And that shame we kind of want to hide away from almost. And then that shuts down the observation. So we just kind of stop in a bit of a shame loop and we kind of try and hide from that, which again makes it much more difficult to create that awareness and to change those loops. And the second stance we can take is to be really curious. Same event, but different approach. The internal voice is saying kind of like, gosh, what was going on for me there? Like, what was I feeling? What was around me? What was I hoping the drink would do? So there's a very different tone. It's not soft, it's not letting yourself off the hook, but it's investigative. And that's what collects the data. And every honest observation is a piece of data that we can use. And that's such a key thing because data has no morality. And again, it's an opportunity not to kind of demonize alcohol. We're just collecting data around our relationship with alcohol. It's not good, it's not bad, it's just information. And information is what starts to loosen the pattern. Because the moment we're able to really clearly see these patterns, then that pattern's already lost some of its power. So in essence, judgment kind of and criticism that stops information, whereas curiosity keeps that information flowing. So now we work on to kind of the tool, how we look at this. So it's 4 questions asked once about your last drink. So not the last, not the next one, the last one. So past is much easier than future. And let's ask them with sort of a curious voice, not a critical one. So what was I feeling in the hour before? Not the story we tell ourselves about the day, but the actual state in our body. So tired, wired, numb, restless, however you were actually feeling. And 2, where was I? What was around me? The literal environment, the room, the time, the people, kind of the objects. What was cueing this without you noticing? And then 3, what did I hope the drink would do? Because, you did essentially hire the drink for something. Was it to take the edge off, to make the evening feel like it had started, to give you permission to stop working, or to help you to talk to someone to feel more comfortable in an environment? Like, what was the job that you hired the alcohol for? And then 4, what did you get? Like, but what did it cost? So you need to do that kind of honest audit. Again, curious. Did it deliver the job? But also, did it cost you anything? In sleep, in mood, the next day? Did the loop get slightly deeper? So that real honest audit. So let me kind of break that down even another layer. So this is a composite drawn from many conversations I've had. And I think this is quite useful because it really clearly helps us to see how we're going to ask these questions of ourselves. So, what was the state? Wired, but exhausted, a bit numb, couldn't sit still. So the person didn't say, I felt stressed, which is the story. They named the actual sensations. So that's the real nervous system state, and it's very specific. Again, the same for the environment. Kitchen, 6:15, husband on his laptop, bottle already open on the counter. So again, multiple cues in that single sentence. Room, time, the absence of connection, the visible bottle. So every one of those is loading the loop. And then the job, okay, to take the edge off, to feel like the workday is over. And that was what the drink was intended to do. And that is also very useful information. And this is a key point. It's useful information because that job doesn't have to be done by alcohol. That job can be done by other things. And then question 4, the honest audit. So it worked for about 20 minutes. Then I had 2 more. I slept really badly. I woke anxious. So that's kind of the full picture, not the polished version. So there's a lot of information in these answers, and there's no self-blame, no shoulds, I could have, I would have, none of that. It's just data, and that's what curiosity sounds like in your own head, applied to your own patterns. It's honest, but it's not, you're not prosecuting yourself. It's just collecting data. And noticing down in that tone, I think is really what starts to loosen the pattern before you've even changed anything at all. So awareness shows you the pattern, but once you can see it, you obviously still have to do something about it. And the first thing to understand before any kind of tools is what your nervous system was asking for, because that's the deeper kind of why underneath many of our automatic drinks that we have. So, you know, when we're young, nobody really teaches us what our nervous system feels like when it's out of balance. And I think in the lives we live today, our nervous systems often are, very kind of highly activated with just the day-to-day hum and stress of life. And we've almost kind of become like so used to it that we feel like that's how we feel all the time. And because we've not really become aware of it, it's difficult to name what we're feeling kind of the hour before we have that drink. And if we can't name it, it's difficult to address. So the drink kind of becomes the only tool that works because it's the only response we know how to reach for. So your nervous system is essentially has kind of two directions that it can go in when it's out of balance. Too much, which is activation, or too little, which is shutdown. And many of us spend evenings sliding kind of between them without really even naming what they are. And that's kind of the thing. If you can't really name what you are, it becomes very difficult to choose the appropriate response. We rather just reach for a drink because a drink covers both of them. So naming which state you're in is already the first act of regulation. It puts your prefrontal cortex back online and it opens up options for you. I mean, let's be honest about the substance itself. Alcohol works. I mean, it genuinely does calm the nervous system. Within minutes of that first glass, the activation you've been carrying all day starts to drop. It works and it's chemical. No one's denying that. But alcohol, it's simply the fastest downregulation tool most adults were ever handed. So we weren't taught about breath work in school, and we didn't taught how to discharge a stressful day. But we saw the drink, we saw it on TV, we saw it in our parents, we saw the drink. So that kind of became the default. And for the first hour or two, it delivers exactly what it promises. The edge does drop, your shoulders drop down, and that's why the pattern sticks. It works. initially. But, and the big but here, alcohol does one thing to your nervous system in the first 2 hours, and then it does the exact opposite for the next 10 hours. So it calms you down, and then your body compensates by ramping you back up again, harder than before. That's the rebound. So your sleep fragments around 3 in the morning, you start that 3 a.m. wake up and, kind of not getting into the deep sleep. Your cortisol rises and you often wake with more anxiety than you started with, which means that same afternoon dip tomorrow is going to feel worse. And then the pull towards the drink is going to be stronger. So we're just getting stuck in that kind of cycle. And as that loop deepens, because that's what the substance of alcohol biologically does, then every drink that we kind of have and we need, and we just get stuck deeper and deeper. That's basically the chemistry of it. I wanted to mention something else as well. Again, that idea of demonizing alcohol. A craving is not a moral failure. It's a dysregulated nervous system asking for help. And I think once you truly understand that, the whole conversation and the whole way we think around alcohol changes. And the question stops being, how do I resist that drink? And it more becomes, how do I change the state, that nervous system state? So the way out is not to fight the tool, not to fight alcohol, but rather we want to give our nervous system a better tool than alcohol. So this is kind of one of the most powerful. It's essentially, it's the fastest evidence-backed way that we know of how to downshift your nervous system. And it takes 60 seconds. And it's called the extended exhale, or sometimes the physiological sigh. So 2 short inhales through the nose, and then 1 slow exhale through the mouth, longer than the inhale. Repeat for 60 seconds, and that is literally it. The mechanism is super simple. The long exhale directly activates the part of your nervous system responsible for calming you down, the parasympathetic nervous system. Nothing else you can do in 60 seconds shifts your state as reliably. And that downshift you get is the same job that the evening drink has been doing for you. Same direction, same system, except this version costs you nothing and it's with you everywhere. And, if we kind of remember what we said about that loop, if you meet the state before the cue fires, you are not fighting anything. You're just arriving. So we're arriving at that kitchen already downshifting. And that pull is much smaller than it would have been if we come in there super activated, nervous system all over the place. And that's the difference between the tool you use at the peak of a craving and a tool you use to make the craving smaller in the first place. So this brings us kind of into habit architecture. So now you can see the pattern, and we have a tool for changing the state directly, but we haven't really yet touched on the environment, which is where there's quite a lot of kind of leverage that you can utilize. So habits, well, how do we put it? Habit science tells us that by the time you are consciously deciding whether to have a drink, the habit loop's already been running for several seconds, as we kind of went over in the previous slide. So that cue is fired, the craving rose, the routine loaded, and your conscious mind arrives late to this whole situation. Your conscious mind is arriving by the time you are pouring that drink. So, those cues are not big emotional events, they're mundane. It's the time of the day, the specific room, the specific chair, the friend that you always have a drink with, the bottle sitting in your eye line on the counter, the particular glass that means wind down time. It's a sunny day, you're having a braai, whatever it is. The brain has bound those behaviors to signals through hundreds and hundreds of repetitions, and it fires the sequence automatically. And that's exactly what brains are built to do. It's doing its job. But here's the reframe. When the environment triggers you before you've chosen anything, that's not weakness. That's a perfectly functioning brain doing its job. And it means something very hopeful, in fact. If the environment is running the show, then the environment is where the leverage is. So we don't have to become stronger people by Friday. We just have to become better architects of our environment. So there are a few things that we can play around with. We can try small redesigns. I mean, they might sound too small to matter, but that's actually kind of deliberate. They work precisely because they are small, because they don't rely on you being strong at 6 on a Thursday when you've got kind of nothing left. It's been a week. Rather, we're looking at things to kind of support you at that Thursday 6 p.m. So same glass, different drink. So much of that evening drink is the ritual around it, kind of the pause, the pour, the signal to the whole system that the workday is over. So you can keep every bit of that same glass, that same moment, that same chair, just change what goes in the glass some nights. So you keep the ritual that your nervous system loves, and the alcohol quietly becomes optional rather than automatic. That doesn't work for everyone, but sometimes it can be quite a powerful, option to just occasionally bring into the mix. And then move it out of sight. This is a big one. Take the bottle off the counter, put it somewhere that requires a deliberate step to reach. It sounds insultingly simple, but the research on this is really consistent. Adding one step between the cue and action creates a gap, and it's in that gap for the first time all evening that an actual choice is happening now rather than that autopilot. And then third, which I think is the most powerful, is your kind of arrival transition ritual. So that's, your ritual as you walk in the door after work or as you arrive at a party. Those are kind of first 10 minutes of any sort of arrival ritual are often very undesigned, which means it's easy for old patterns to just come in. So if we consciously design them, we consciously make changes, we do that extended exhale that we just talked about. We eat before we have a drink, we step outside briefly, we pour another drink first. All of that matters, and it really has a big impact. And it actually matters far less what the new ritual is itself. What matters the most is that there actually is a new ritual. So I'd love you to try, one of those. You don't have to do them all. Pick one. The point is the redesign itself. And in that redesign itself, it's the proof that it is possible. And that evidence is really what unlocks everything after it. So if we take it now another layer, so a deeper layer, the layer underneath all of the tools, we're looking at identity. And that's, because tools change your evening, identity changes your life. So there's two different places that we can kind of sit on this. And most of us have really only been exposed to two options. Either you are sober or you are someone who drinks the way that everyone around you drinks. And those two ways are both defined by other people. There's not really any room in between. And I'd like to show you that there's a third option. So the first place we can find ourselves is restriction. And that kind of internal dialogue is, I'm trying not to drink tonight. And if we listen to that sentence carefully, inside it, alcohol is still in charge. We're still trying not to drink. We're giving alcohol all that power. And every social occasion becomes a negotiation. And then we're running into that willpower again. And also, I don't know if anyone's ever experienced willpower after the first drink. It's bound to fail. That's that kind of resource running on empty. People can live in restriction for many years, white knuckling their way through it all, but that becomes quite exhausting. So I would like to propose that second place that we can be in is agency. So the internal sentence, becomes I choose when alcohol fits. And you can really feel the difference in your body when you kind of think about those two sentences. In the second one, alcohol's been demoted, the power's gone. It's no longer a force that you resist or you have to obey. It's an option that you are giving yourself, something that you might genuinely choose at a real celebration. And uh, conversely, might skip on an ordinary Tuesday. Not because you're being good, but because it simply does not fit what you want from that evening. Agency requires no label. You never have to decide whether you're a drinker or not a drinker. Those are boxes that other people have built. The work is really about building an identity from the inside. And here's the mechanism. So identity doesn't change with a big announcement. It doesn't change by deciding this weekend that you are now a person who drinks less. Identity changes by accumulation. So one small kept promise at a time. Every time you run the new arrival ritual, it's one vote for the person who chooses. When you notice an urge and let it pass without acting, that's another vote. Every time you pour a drink, a different drink in the same glass, another vote. So individually, they might feel very small and insignificant, but if enough of them accumulate, the identity starts to shift under you without you having ever made a big announcement about it. You're also much more likely to succeed with this approach than big blanket statements. And this is all also why the small architecture pieces matter more than they seem to. A different pour is not just a different pour, it's a vote for yourself. And it makes those tools become the identity one repetition at a time. So you never have to tell anyone, what you're doing. It usually works better if you don't, actually, because then the identity is built for its own sake, not for anyone else's approval. And that also kind of brings that curiosity thread through because, votes are also data. You watch them accumulate without a scorecard or any kind of target, just noticing. I ran that ritual last night. I didn't drink on Tuesday. My sleep was much better Tuesday night. I felt much better on Wednesday. So that ongoing curiosity about your own patterns is kind of the how would we say it? It's like the engine underneath it all. So it's really not about discipline, it's about interest. And this one more thing before we kind of bring it all together. This was I don't know why it took me so long to figure this out, but and it might be quite a liberating fact for you as well, but an urge is not a command. It's not something we have to succumb to. So nobody taught me this. We kind of grow up assuming that a craving is an instruction. I really feel like a chocolate, I must have one. I really feel like a drink, I must have one. But actually, urges rise and they peak and they pass, usually within 20 minutes, absolute maximum, whether you act on them or you don't. The urge is just information. It's your nervous system flagging something. It's not an order. And there's a really nice kind of skill for this called urge surfing. So you're not fighting the wave, you ride it in 4 steps. Firstly, you notice it, you name it without judgment. So, there's an urge. Um, and moving it also kind of moves you from splashing around inside that wave to be able to stand back on the shore and kind of just watch the wave. Secondly, locate it. So urges, they're very physical. They live in the body, in the chest, the throat, the jaw, the hands. So find where your urge sits. And that attention on sensation interrupts that automatic loop again. And then 3, breathe through the peak. So, that long exhales, the extended exhale from earlier, while the wave rises, you're not pushing it down. You're just keeping your system regulated while it does what the waves do. You can also even set a timer just to really be aware and notice how quickly it passes. And then the 4th step is watch it pass. And it always does. Every urge you've ever had has ended, every single one. And the first time you consciously surf that urge, I think something shifts quite permanently because now you know that it's not an instruction and you really know that, alcohol doesn't have control or power over you. We have the agency. So if we bring it all together, um, these four pillars are not separate things, they reinforce each other. So awareness reveals the pattern. And once you can see that loop, you have something to work with. Regulation gives your nervous system what it was reaching for, which means the drink is no longer the only tool that answers that state. Habit architecture removes the automatic pull, so the loop doesn't just run in the dark anymore. And then the identity work done as accumulation makes all of it much more durable, much more likely to stick. And so it stops being a nightly negotiation and being rather just who you are. And what you end up with is not abstinence, unless that's what you want. What you end up with is alcohol as an occasional, considered choice, not a reflex, not a script. It becomes a choice. And that's what taking the power back looks like in practice, 1 week at a time. So as Adrian mentioned, if there's anything that we've touched on today that's something that you would like support with or has resonated with you, I do work with people one-on-one. We go much deeper into this, really explore kind of, regulating the nervous system and a lot more practical tools. So I'm available on the Talk platform if that's something that resonates with you. And yeah, I just want to leave you with the question we started with, because I think you have a little more context now. Before your next drink, just get curious. What am I reaching for? Is it relief, connection, habit, or is it something else? You don't need the answer yet. Ask it with the curious voice, not the critical one, and notice what you notice. And that's the whole practice. And thank you for spending this time with me. I'd like to hand back over to Adrian and hopefully some questions and discussion.
Awesome, Angie. Thank you very much. Guys, feel free to pop any questions into the chat as we go here. I've got a few that I'm gonna start with, if you don't mind, Angie.
Perfect.
I think just maybe a step back to even the very beginning. Um, for getting curious in this, and I really love the approach to sort of curiosity. Um, who and when should we be getting curious? Do you need to get to a stage of thinking, how I drink too much, or actually sort of question things enough to, start that curiosity? Or is it something and a worthwhile, experience for each of us to kind of consider, regardless of where we feel our current relationship with alcohol is?
Yeah, I mean, that's an awesome question. And it's a completely personal preference. So one person might feel comfortable with having one drink a night, whereas another person might feel comfortable with having 10 drinks a night. It's all, kind of, it just depends on where you sit. But I would suggest that even if you are a very social drinker and, only have the occasional drink, I would suggest that the same principles apply. Even if you are only having a drink on the weekend, is that drink still serving you in the same way that you actually wanted to? You know what I mean? Are you still going for your Sunday run if that's something you like doing? Is it costing you sleep? Are you an older person and hormonally it's affecting you? I think the thing is, there's such a kind of movement around sober curious, and I think that's amazing. But I think there's a deeper level than just like I'm restricting my drinking. I think there's a layer that we need to put in there that's, what is my alcohol consumption doing for me? What is it costing me? Am I really using it as a celebration and a joyful tool, or am I using it as something more of a coping mechanism? So I really believe that this is a question that's super relevant for absolutely everyone in whatever way you may or may not drink.
And I think, that perhaps regardless of where people are, they can explore that bit that you mentioned there a little bit more about what is it costing me.
Yeah.
And there's no health benefit to adding alcohol to your diet, which I think we can agree on, and we can still have a safe amount of it. But when you talk about what it is costing me, and maybe that's where some of us can even start.
Yeah.
What are the things that we could look at there that make us reflect on the impact alcohol could have? Are there some easy things to the morning after think about, track maybe some physiological things? What are maybe some of the easiest low-hanging fruit to see?
100%. So the two main easiest things is, so the firstly sleep. If you have any kind of sleep track devices, apps, however you do track your sleep, or even if you don't, just awareness around wakefulness. And often the people I work with, I ask them, how do you sleep? And they say, no, I sleep fine, I sleep great. A good exercise is don't drink for a couple of weeks and see your quality of sleep. See how you feel in the mornings when you wake up. Are you jumping out of bed or are you a little groggy? Like, did you get that deep sleep? Because the thing is, with alcohol, it initially puts you to sleep and then it spikes at about 3 a.m. or so, depends when you went to bed. And then you're having very light sleep. So you're never getting that full recovery that you need. And then obviously mood as well. You find yourself, if you find yourself a little more snappy with people around you, than kind of reacting to things that weren't necessarily a big deal. So that's all that dysregulated nervous system. So the alcohol is also triggering more. It's such a kind of two-sided thing, because you're having a drink because you want to feel just a little bit more relaxed, it take the edge off the day, as people say, but actually you're triggering a loop which is putting more of an edge on the next day. So you're just kicking the bucket. So I would track your sleep, absolutely, and then track mood. If you're a person who's prone towards anxiety, see how present you are with your family and friends, the next day, like see the real cost and impact that it has on you.
And I mean, easy enough to track, which is amazing. Dr. Ben Jasinski did a session, a webinar on sleep a little while ago, and if anyone wants to go and have a look back at that, but spoke a lot about the sleep architecture,
Yeah,
and alcohol helping us fall asleep, but actually then impacting, the quality of sleep. So we think
yeah,
we got the hours, but we actually didn't get the value
yeah,
that sleep provided. So maybe it's as easy as journaling, how you guys are feeling the next
yeah.
day, the mood, whatever it is. If you do have a sleep tracker, if you've got a wearable, these are devices that can give you some of these things. The face scan that's now available in Strove as well. You can do your heart rate and heart rate variability and see how that changes, over time when you adjust these sorts of things. So I think adding all that data into your curiosity step is super valuable. And I think maybe just one last question to um, as a maybe a slight segue, but the the processes that you've described here kept resonating with me for I think how we behave beyond just alcohol.
Yes.
And there's maybe a lot more, to go through these types of things and understand our cravings and cues and what we're putting into our actual actions. And if you're on this call, maybe that resonates to you with using alcohol, but it might be other things. And what's causing us to have a poor meal or to not exercise, or the things that are getting in the way of our health journey. So I know you work with people beyond just alcohol, but do you see that as a common thread in other behavior change approaches that you might take, and this similar model?
Absolutely, 100%. So, that habit architecture, that nervous system regulation, the identity work, it's interesting. Most of the people I work with, in this space, end up saying to me, well, this started off as alcohol, but it's actually so much more, that awareness. piece and that curiosity piece, I mean, that applies to our interactions with, our work colleagues, noticing when we're triggered, not reacting, rather taking a moment to take a breath. How our relationship with food, our relationship with exercise, our relationship with self, with others, all of those pieces come together in kind of how we approach life. So yeah, 100%.
Awesome. Angie, thank you so much for your time. I think it's been incredibly valuable. We'll post up this webinar both in our app and on YouTube again if anyone wants to rewatch it or perhaps share it on to any friends, family, colleagues that you think might benefit from what we've chatted about today. And like Angie mentioned, if you do want to dig a little bit deeper and you've got access to one-on-one consults via your app, you can find them on your homepage and find a time to meet up with Angie and chat through anything. Angie, thank you very much. Everyone who's on the call, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers, guys.
Thanks. Bye.